Hey, welcome to Talking Stand Firm on November the 19th. And, we're actually recording this a bit early and because I was scheduled to be out. But we're hoping to pull this off. We still want to hear from you because we're hoping that we can still interact with the comments going live. So get in the conversation, hop in. We're going to talk all things Stand Firm. And we're not celebrating the end of a series, but we are finishing our series, the March On series that we've been doing for a couple months, as what we've been arguing. Arguing is probably a little harsh. What we've been, arguing for. There we go. We got to use it. I can't find another word. If you know another word, help me out there. But we've been talking about, the heart here is, how do we live a life to hear, well done, my good and faithful servant? How do we live faithfully? How do we hold on to our faith? How do we stand firm in difficulty? How do we endure? But standing firm is not enough. Now, when I talk about work and effort, understand we're only saved by grace. There's nothing we can do to earn salvation, to earn our spot in eternity, to fix our sin problem. That was all done on the cross, what Jesus did on the cross. But once we come to Christ, as we follow him, he invites us into his mission. He invites us to follow and live for him. And one day we're going to go before him and give an account. And it says, as it says in Matthew 25, the parable of the talents, we should long to hear, well done, a good and faithful servant, right? Right? I mean, that's what we should long for. That's what we should long for. And so that's what the series has been about, because within that parable, the Lord isn't pleased just by the one who held on. Now, listen, we're not here in the West, here in America, we're not doing a very good job of holding on. We're not. But it's not just holding on. It's also marching on. And so we focus a lot here on Talking Stand Firm on the challenges that are coming in the future. Prophecy, because we feel like it's just not talked about enough. It's not talked about biblically enough. And so we do a lot with that. But we wanted to focus in on an element of the end times that should get more coverage than anything. That's what we read in Matthew 24. The gospel spread to the ends of the earth. The age will end when the gospel spreads to all people groups, however that's calculated, however that's figured in. And so we've been challenging myself, we've all been challenging to march on. So we've finished it today. Today is it. And so as we celebrate it, we're going to take a look back. And Cherrilynn was unable to join me. She is sick at the moment. And so prayers go out to Cherrilynn. Tell her that you miss her. So we have been planning this and working through. We were each going to just take a look back at the things that we've looked at and the guests that we've had, the teachings we've had on Thursday night. You know how this thing works. On Thursday night, I teach. I try to challenge myself to stay under 25 minutes. Most of them end up 26, 27 minutes. Hey, it's getting close. So try to stay under 25 minutes. It's on Teaching Stand Firm, and we try to give a 360 view. Whatever subject that I talk about, then come on here on Friday at noons, and we break it down 30 minutes or so. The first half of the show, we want to hear from you and take questions and try to iron out all the things I got wrong the night before, and then just have some dialogue about it. And Cherrilynn comes in and likes to set me straight. David set me straight behind the scenes, and when we don't have a guest, we bring him on to give us some feedback of things he caught, because we want to make sure we're just fully looking at the subject, and then we bring in someone on that subject. And so we have been focusing again the last 2.5 months on marching on. We've had some phenomenal guests. I hope there's been some great teaching. That's the verdict's out on that on Thursday nights. But our guest today, super excited about that as we march on from marching on. We've got my good friend Darren Hucky in. Darren Hucky is with a Messianic teaching ministry that does a tremendous work. He's a writer, has some great content out there. But he's here to talk about Hanukkah, because coming up just in a week is the start of Hanukkah. And for many of you I know who follow Talking Stand Firm, you understand why we would talk about that. What brought me to a more understanding of the feast is understanding the prophetic significance of these feasts, these celebrations that the the Lord put in place. And so we have spent a lot of time. Our good friend Chadwick Harvey is going to be on in 2 weeks. He's going to be on after Thanksgiving to talk about, again, the prophetic aspect of Hanukkah. And so we've talked about that a lot. But I just wanted to just to pause and stop and look back at really the meaning of that. So I'm looking forward to talking to Darren here in a bit when he comes on. So here we go. Let's go back in time. Let's look back at the lessons that we learned in this March On series. I hope you caught the teaching last night because that's what I talked about. I just went back and went through some of the lessons. We're going to do that a bit again today. Again, I hate it's just me. Cherrilynn needed to be here to walk through this with me. So get in the comments. Do you remember anything? So just going through the teachings that we have. So the first teaching that we did on Thursday night was called One Thing You Must Do to Be Found Faithful. And again, it's not just one thing. We understand that's a little oversimplification, but the one thing being left out is, guys, we got to participate in the Great Commission. We've got to be part of the disciple-making process. It's got to be on our mind. So that's where we started, and that was the one thing. And so that was the teaching. And then we looked at what was probably the most popular teaching out of this series was revival versus remnant, and talked about when we think about the end times, a lot of just conversation, a lot of teaching and preaching that we hear talks about this idea that there's going to be this great awakening part 4, like some of the great awakenings in the past here in America and over in Europe and things, that the masses coming to the Lord. And that's not what Scripture shows or reveals. Now, it shows a mighty work of the Lord at the end of the age. That's there. We talked about that. As we talked about this, we had a teaching called the second heroic age of the church. But it's going to happen in a remnant, a small remnant of those who are seeking truth, being faithful, and carrying out that Great Commission. And it's the snowball effect of just kind of one after one after one, and that remnant growing. I mean, that's what it has done. Which, when you look at Scripture and you look at how the gospel has spread, I'm teaching currently on Sundays through Matthew 13, the parables. And there's a parable there that I think gets missed quite a bit, that Jesus really was telling what's going to happen with the gospel. And so I want to read from here, Matthew 13. So Matthew 13, the parable of the sower, the 4 souls, we typically think of that. But the parable of the mustard seed. Now, we think of the passage of where the Lord says, if you have enough faith, have just the faith of a small mustard seed, you can move the mountains. That's usually the mustard seed verse or passage we go to. But in Matthew 13, verse 31, check out this parable. The Lord said, he told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took, planted in his field. Though it is the smallest of all seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree, so that birds come and perch in its branches. What? Well, Jesus is talking, and so all these parables in Matthew 13 is about the kingdom. He's talking about the spread of his kingdom. He says the spread of the kingdom is like planting a mustard seed. It starts small, but it will grow. And it will grow into a tree, and the birds perching and landing in that. It's a beautiful, beautiful picture. And that, if we look back, that's what happened. I mean, think of those disciples hearing him say that, because he's teaching this, they're hearing him say that, and then they live it. They get to see in their lifetime the tree starting to form, and we look back at this tree, and it's not done growing. But just in our own context, in our own sphere of influences, our own networks, our own neighborhoods, the Lord wants us to plant seeds, and they become big trees. And that's what this small remnant, but it grows. And I say that because I think, and the reason for that teaching was because a lot of times we just think there's going to be this big end time revival. Let's kick our feet up. The Lord's going to save everybody at the end, so we're good. No, it's something we got to get into and grind it out. So then we looked at Jesus' strategy, especially in Matthew 10, as he sent out the disciples. We looked at Paul's strategy. Then we had a teaching called the second heroic age of the church, where we talked about the church at the end of the age. Then we looked at the Great Commission default, which we looked at, talked about the mindset typically is now in response to the Great Commission. If the Lord forces me, I'll go somewhere. But if he doesn't, I won't have to. But rather we should flip that, and our heart should be, send me to the front lines, Lord. Send me to the front lines. Then our next teaching was the Great Commission leverage. And we talked about, the passage where the Lord says night is coming. So let's work while we can. And really this was a challenge to us here in the West. There's going to come a time where the freedom and the wealth of the West is going to go away, and somebody said, good, good for you guys. And, but we need to leverage that while we can for the gospel. There has been great things done for the gospel through the United States, not just the United States, around the world. United States, some of you are from around the world, your nations are beginning to eclipse the missions from the United States. But while we can, let's take a and this is all of us, not just the United States. And then last night we touched on some of this. You're kind of getting a repeat here, March on lesson. So that's the teachings that we had this past time. Again, you can find them wherever you're watching this, whatever channel. I do encourage you, help us out. Go over to Stand Firm, whether on YouTube or Facebook, both. Like us on Facebook, subscribe over at YouTube. But all those videos are there. They're in a playlist, and you can work your way through it. And so as we pick up, you also find our teachings there on the Antichrist. We had a couple great teachings. That's probably the most popular we've done, and also one called the End Time Scenario. It just really lays out what's going to happen towards the end of the age. And so I encourage you to check that out. But it's wherever you're checking this out. But I'd love to hear from you. Out of those teachings that hopefully you've caught some of those on Thursday night. What's the one thing that jumped out to you? Come on, somebody. Hit the comments. Let us know one thing that jumped out to you. Well, we have had some tremendous guests here. It's dangerous. So one of the first things in ministry that I got to do is I worked with, it was a team of us. I was in college. Some of these were high school seniors. Some of them were in college, but it was a group of us that part of the group did music. We had a guy who was blind, and he did comedy. He could do any voice there was. I mean, it just was tremendous. And I spoke, and so we would go around and do these youth events, youth crusades, youth rallies. It was a really, really cool time. And so I had this bright idea one time as we would go and we'd do like multi-night events at churches, crusades, and maybe a whole weekend. And we were at this week-long event, like over spring break at this church. And they were doing like potluck meals every night. Is potluck, is that a universal thing? Again, I'd love to hear from you. How does that translate if you're from out of the South? I'm revealing myself here, right? Potluck, is that, David, is that a universal thing? Yeah, potluck's on the West Coast. Okay. That's not. So anyway, that's why I had potluck night. So everybody brought like their favorite dish. And so I had this bright idea that we would rank the top 10 dishes. Oh man, you talk about like hacking people off as we picked one dish over the other. Terrible thing. So I know I shouldn't ask this, but what's some of the recent guests over this March On series that jumped out to you? I'd love to hear from you. If you remember something they said, hey, put it in the comment. We would love to hear it. That'd be encouraging that you are listening out there. So double check something here. Make sure our guest did get the link here. Just thinking, sorry. Carry on with your conversation. Get in the mix, man. I'm going all over the place, aren't I, tonight? Yeah, it's just dawned on me. I may have not got him the link. Oh, no. So anyway, so here we go. Talk amongst yourself. Okay. We've got that double check. Make sure we're sent. So if he doesn't show up in a little bit, that's my fault. Didn't get the link in time. Anyway, did you think about the guest? So we started with a interview that you did not get to see. I interviewed someone we had interviewed before, Jordan Scott of Frontier Alliance International, as he's done work in other parts of the world. And we talked about the disciple making movement, DMM. We talked about Discovery Bible Study. You wouldn't know that we didn't get to release it. We did this out of just protection of some things that were said there that didn't need to get said. But I would tell you, it was an awesome conversation that I got to hear. And the one thing that I pulled out of that I thought was really good is when you are building relationships to reach someone. Now, granted, when we build relationships, they need to be genuine. It's not just building a relationship to, get someone saved and that moved on. No, it's genuine care. As I had someone, a disciple maker leader, tell me the other day, it's a lifelong investment. It's not just this, one-time thing. No, it's a lifelong investment. But the timing of that, a lot of times we kind of just want to rush into sharing with somebody. And it talked about as you're in that relationship with, it sounds strange, as you have that relationship and you're walking through life with someone, that there's going to be moments in their life that reveals the need for the gospel. And it's at those moments that you share. And it's not like pouncing on them because, they gave me an open window for Jesus here. But life is hard. And as things come up, sharing how you get through things like that and get through stuff. And I thought that was a really good point. So as we talked about, how do we march on? How do we participate in the Great Commission? It goes into seeking the Holy Spirit. Continue to build that relationship. Don't hold back. But at the same time, you also may need to wait for the moment, wait for the point. And I also shared some training that I got to have with a group called KC Underground in Kansas City. And they talked about how that in reaching your neighborhood, how that you just get in a regular rhythm. You be a good neighbor. And as you begin a good neighbor, you trust the Holy Spirit's working. And those moments are going to come. They're going to present themselves. But you do need to have the boldness to say it when it does. And but they will come up. So, hey, our guest has the link, so we're good. I'm not sure if he did the first place I sent it. So had the chance to have Jordan Scott on. We have a previous interview from him a year ago where he shared from his book, A Call to Compel, which is just a tremendous book. I know some of you have read it, about sharing the gospel. I encourage you to check it out. Frontier Alliance International, Call to Compel. You can find it also on Amazon as well. Then we had Luis Ortega of Life Word Ministries. They do broadcast all over the world, and I had heard him share a message about the gospel must advance, regardless of the difficulty and regardless of the challenge. And I thought that was, for this time that we're in with COVID, we talk about participating in the Great Commission. Well, it doesn't stop just because it's difficult. Now, again, granted, there needs to be precautions, right? And precautions, maybe range differently between each of us, but at the same time, the gospel must advance. Then we had just a phenomenal interview with Larry Barker of Healthy Church Solutions, also North American Church Planner, director for the Baptist Missionary Association of America. Just a tremendous interview, as we were talking about making disciples and being disciple makers. And we asked him, what's the first step we need to do? And it blew me away. I'd love to hear from you if you remember that. He just said, learn someone's name, start a conversation. And he introduced us to the Ingles Scale, which was basically this scale. He said, looking at it as if you've got a scale 1 to 10. And when you're talking with somebody, you're just moving them up that scale being closer to the Lord. Well, he talked about -10, 0 being conversion, +10, and just, finding them maybe at -10, -8, wherever they're at, and moving them up the scale. And I thought that was a beautiful picture. We'd love to hear from you if you checked out the Ingles Scale from that. Then we had Jody Anderson of Apartment Life. His interview was so good, Cherrilyn's signed up. She's part of it. She's already been offered a gig, a job with that. And so we look forward to seeing that journey. I hope some of you have checked it out as well. But it's a business that comes alongside apartment complexes, community living, and they basically hire someone to come in and shepherd and care for that community. This business also happens to be very Christian and mission oriented, and it just was a tremendous interview. I encourage you to check that out. And what Jody talked about, again, we asked him, okay, at the end, we said, give us steps. How do we do this? How do we go to this proverbial spiritual couch to being in the Great Commission? And he again said the same thing. Larry Barker said, he said, learn someone's name. He said, your first time, learn their name. Second time you see them, call them by name. Man, I've been trying to do this, and I'm going to have to write it down. But I've been cautious because a lot of times it's maybe like a waitress somewhere, and I just, I don't think my wife would appreciate this long list of names of women. You know what I mean? So like we haven't had that conversation, work through that. But so at a coffee place, and the guy, barista. There we go. Whatever the term is there. Name's Bryce. Bryce, if you're listening, I doubt you are, but hello. And so he gets my name. He asks me my name every time I go. And so the other day I'm like, hey, Bryce. And he's like, oh man, I'm sorry. I got to ask you your name as well. And so, man, it's, do it. So that was, think about it. So we were, arguing for getting in the mix of the Great Commission. And we were asking these guys who are leading ministries with that. And they simply just said, learn their names. Then we had great conversations with two pastors, Pastor Chris Driver out in West Texas, then Pastor Drew Klein here in Arkansas with me. Both phenomenal conversations. They begin to talk about doing Discovery Bible studies within homes, basically taking the church to people. And in this transition, both are in the early stages of doing that in their communities, in their churches. But we just began to talk about as churches how we could do better at making disciples. And that's one thing I'm really stoked about talking to with our guest today. It's not our subject, but I'm gonna have to sneak it in. I see Darren's made it into the green room there, so I hope he's enjoying the yellow M&Ms he requested and sparkling water. We had that ready for him. But he's got a phenomenal book on discipleship. And then I hope you caught our fun interview there live from Central Baptist College as I was at a meeting. And I was like, hey, I just asked, hey, I got a closet I can do this thing in. And they rolled out the blue carpet there at Central Baptist College and brought me up to their conference room. And we had Brian Anderson, Vice President of Enrollment and management there, just come on and do a phenomenal job at how digging into Christian education is fuel for us carrying out the Great Commission. And we wrapped it up last week with Stephanie Quick. Was that not just tremendous as we talked about a mission worth our lives? I encourage you, a phenomenal interview. So we completed it. Again, I'd love to hear from you there in the comments. What did you pick up as we have challenged for a month and over 2 months to march on, to not just stand firm and hold on, not just be a spiritual prepper, but to march on, to march forward. But we're also marching on. We've had our series, March On. Now we're marching on to other series. And so the next 2 episodes, so we'll be off for Thanksgiving. I hope everybody has a great Thanksgiving. We will be back December the 3rd. I think that's right, with Chadwick Harvey to talk about the prophetic emphasis of and implications of Hanukkah. But we've got a good friend of mine, Darren Hucky, who is come on, and we're going to dive into Hanukkah. And again, I know many of you who follow Talking Stand Firm, you follow already some Hebrew roots and follow some some ministries along those lines. And so this isn't nothing new maybe to you, but to some of you it may be. You may be like me 20 years ago when I met Darren. Darren's a graphic design artist, one of the best I've seen. I met him through that, knew he was a believer. And then fairly soon after that, he released a book about I think it's called The 4 Responsibilities. And I don't have my notes before me on this, but the 4 responsibilities of a disciple. Yes. As he taps into just the Jewish roots of discipleship. Phenomenal book, phenomenal resource as we talk about making disciples and being a disciple, but looking at it from the point of view as it would have been understood in that first century. Phenomenal work. But I remember reading that, and Darren came out to my church locally and spoke, and I saw the value of that. Like historical background was the the thoughts that I had in mind. And then soon after that, one of my good friends in college began meeting with Darren, who was doing a group at home, and they were celebrating some of the feast and those things. And I'm like, well, what's going on? This is sounding cultish, man. So, I'm talking to my friend, hey, man, I think Darren's great, but you watch out what you're doing. But the Lord continued to work. And this past year, my family celebrated Hanukkah for the first time as a family. We had Darren come on and wrote an article that you'll find in the notes for our parent ministry, Stand Firm Kids, Stand Firm Parents. And we've got him on tab to write throughout this next year, introducing to parents these feasts. And so we want to talk more into that. And so that's my butchering of an introduction. But Darren Hucky is the director of a Messianic teaching ministry focused on discipleship from a biblically Hebraic perspective. Darren is an accomplished writer, teacher, and musician, and has been active in ministry and our religious leadership since 1994. He has served in various capacities such as worship leader, youth pastor, lay pastor, and has been studying Hebraic Jewish roots since 1998. He was ahead of the curve. Jewishness of Jesus has radically changed his life, and understanding of Jesus called discipleship. His focus over the last several years has been connecting the church back to its Jewish roots, bringing insights into life teachings in the ministry of Jesus from Jewish sources. He has been the rabbi's assistant at Shalom Macon in Macon, Georgia since 2016. Darren, thanks for joining me.
Hey, my pleasure, buddy. Good to be online with you.
Yeah, so like mid-show, I don't know if you got it. I emailed you the link earlier today, and it just hit me. I don't know if that email is even active anymore. And so I stopped. So the first half of the show, we follow up from our teaching, and we've been doing this series, and we ended it last week, and we were just catching up with everyone, and so on that, and so in the middle of that, I'm just, oh man, I don't know if he got it. So I'm like, I know I can text it to you. So Darren, it is great to have this conversation.
Yes, sir. Good to be here. I'm excited. I really had wondered, and you and I have not really got to talk about the connection that was made a year or so ago, but I knew we had mutual friends. I knew I'd been to your congregations and spoke there and things like that. And I didn't know where the turn had happened. And so it's good to hear a little bit of that story.
Yeah. And I totally butchered the story, but no, I mean, that's for real. So I had you come out and speak, and did a phenomenal job at my church. I loved your book. I mean, I read it just to review it. I mean, to check it out. But also, at the time I'm thinking, oh, this makes sense that you should, biblical background, context, that aspect is how I'm thinking. And then my good friend Jared became a part of your fellowship, and and he's sharing what he's learning, and I'm like, oh man, what has he got into? I trust Darren, but what has he got into? And then it was actually the prophetic circle, as understanding the prophetic significance of the feast is actually the blood moon craze a few years ago that kind of led me to study of that. But seeing how Jesus fulfilled these feasts, in a sense, the spring feast, and how that may be implications in the future to some degree, is what led me to that. And then it just more and more, it's like, wait a minute, the Lord created this stuff. This was, and that was my first question for you. And as I was writing out the question, I'm like, it answers itself. I mean, because
right.
We're talking about Hanukkah, and I think really the elephant in the room is why would Gentile Christians celebrate it? Why? And so I wrote down, why should they be concerned with the feast of the Lord? I'm like, oh, well, wait a minute. That answers it. It's the feast of the Lord. But so let's say Old Testament feast, so you don't give the whole question away. But tell us, why should Gentile Christians be concerned or involved in this?
So let me just break down the question for real quick. Yeah. For us. So why would we be concerned, first of all, with the feasts in what we call the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures? Then we'll talk about Hanukkah. But the first of all is, as you said, as you're writing out your question, you said the feast of the Lord. Well, that's the answer. But the deeper question is, I think it goes back to the book and the teaching that I came to your church and taught, was that we are to be disciples of Yeshua, of Jesus of Nazareth, right? He is our Messiah. He's the King. He's the returning King. And our job is to be the best disciple we can be. And part of that is to do the things that he did and to live the life that he lived. And no, we're not supposed to pretend that we're Jewish. I'm not Jewish. You're not Jewish. But I move in circles that there are Jewish people, and I am very comfortable in a Jewish synagogue, and I'm as comfortable or more there than I am at church sometimes. But yet Yeshua, Jesus, is my master. He's my King. He's my Savior. He's my Lord. And for me, discipleship is about living a life that mimics our master, that mimics our rabbi. You know, he was called rabbi throughout the what I like to call the apostolic scriptures, and you know, his followers called him rabbi. And why shouldn't we? Why isn't he our rabbi? And so that's a big thing. And so to do the things that he did, to live the life, and I think a big part of this too is the festivals of the Lord are set up in such a way that they're cyclical. They come every year. You know, everybody can tell you when Christmas, when Easter is, when Thanksgiving is, and so forth like that. But how many people that actually follow Jesus can tell you when Passover is, when Pentecost is, when you know, Yom Kippur is, when Tabernacles is, and so forth. I think that's a big component of it, because once we experience these festivals, once we actually do more than just read about them as an historic event of some sort, but we actually live them, then they come alive. And every year we're taught a new aspect of redemption. We're taught a new aspect of Yeshua and his character, and a new aspect of what the Father wants to do in and through each one of us. And so I think it's a learning experience. I think it's something that we can teach our children to pass on generations, that they can experience God's redemption through these events, every single event, you know, festival throughout every year. I think it's wonderful. My family, you know, my kids have grown up in it. They really don't know anything else, and they're excited every festival. They're super excited.
So you said you began in '98. Would be when you first began celebrating them as a family, or what's the story there with you?
So our story is pretty interesting, actually. So my wife and I got married in 1994, and we moved from the Fort Smith area in Arkansas to Conway, where my wife was finishing up getting her master's degree. And you know, of course, we didn't have any children at that time, but we joined a non-denominational church, and we joined, like, I think in the fall or the summer probably, and spring rolls around, and they have something they call a Seder for Passover at this church. And we were like, that is really interesting. You know, my wife, of course, you know, she is much more in tune at times than I am. And so
that's true for everyone. Yeah.
Yeah. She's all excited. She's, you know, very, very excited, wants to know more, and digging and stuff like that. And I'm just like, oh, this is interesting. You know, that's about it. And but we celebrated it for 6 years in that church. Now, it's a little ironic that we celebrated it with yeast rolls and pork tenderloin, but you know, the Feast of Unleavened Bread.
They cancel it out. Yeah.
Right. But it was a start, you know, and it spoke into our lives, and it created something in us that made us look for something more. It made us look back to the biblical text. It made us look back to the biblical history and who Yeshua was at that time. You know, all we knew was Jesus, the traditional Jesus that we'd grown up knowing in the church. We didn't know that, you know, his Jewish side and all the things that came with it. And then, excuse me, my wife and a friend of hers decided, for some reason, they looked up some stuff online. They wanted to visit a congregation that did more of this kind of stuff. And so they found a Messianic congregation in Memphis. And so they decided to attend, and they, lo and behold, they met on Saturdays. And so, hey, we can do this, and it won't conflict with our church schedule and everything. And so they took off one Saturday. She asked me if I wanted to go. I said, nah, no thanks. And so, and then
here, I've been giving you all the credit, but it was your wife all along, right?
That is right. And behind every good man is a wonderful woman. So, anyway, the Lord used that, in a nutshell, the Lord used that meeting, that service there, to speak deeply in her life. She came back excited, and I was not interested in whatsoever in what she had to say. I wasn't interested in the things that she was trying to convince me of or present to me at the time. She brought back a book talking about, the Sabbath, the festivals, all that kind of stuff. And I was just like, I'm not going under the law,
Yeah.
And that was my response. And so my wife, in her infinite wisdom, said, I'm not going to push this. I'm going to just pray and see what the Lord does. And lo and behold, actually just a few months later, some events happened that we're still trying to put all the pieces of the puzzle together here 20 plus years later. And but the Lord started speaking to me and revealing things to me. And once he did, I took off running. I haven't hardly touched the ground since. So,
yeah. I mean, just phenomenal. And it seems to be, I know many of the people that we come in contact with that are viewing right now, I mean, they have a journey of seeking the Lord, getting in the Word, reading. I mean, just simply reading the Word, and it ends up in this same path.
Right.
With that, and I didn't have your books before me. I do now. So I butchered it earlier. I got it pretty much right. The 4 Responsibilities of a Disciple. Yeah, I mean, I encourage people, check it out. A great read. I'm just seeing $3.99 at Kindle. Go get it now. I mean,
there you go.
Yeah. I remember reading. I mean, it was such an impact on me. So a few years ago, I was writing for. I won't throw anybody under the bus. But I was writing for. No, I'll throw everybody on the bus. The largest denomination in the world's number one, news site, and I covered this prophecy conference, and I just told what happened. I just said, these guys spoke. These are who they are. One of them had a book called "When a Jew Rules the World," and that's all I said. He's the author of this book, "When a Jew Rules the World." And they come back to me and they said, "Hey, Jay, we can't run this, man. It's so controversial." I'm like, "What? How is it controversial?" He said, "Well, for example, you said when a Jew rules the world." I'm like, yeah, Jesus. Yeah, I mean, and that's that is so. I think that understanding of, hey, Jesus was Jewish is missing. Much less so much with that. And so I love where you went and said, hey, to be a disciple is to do what the Lord did, and hey, he was Jewish. So along those lines, this help us understand a bit more. And you made a distinction there between Hanukkah and some other feasts, and we don't find specifically Old Testament laying out, what we know of Hanukkah today with the original feast. Does that make it any less significant in regards of the cycle and of the feast?
That's an interesting question. I would say yes and no to that question.